YouTube, Sports Card Radio, welcome back to the channel. Hopefully you guys are having a wonderful day. Unfortunately, we're joining you again today with another scam in this hobby. This time it's coming from Drew's Cards, otherwise known as Really Good Cards. Now, this is a different type of scam, although we've seen this type before. Now, it relates a little bit to what we talked about last week about the backyard breaks guys. And so these guys, I wouldn't buy a $2,000 used car from these guys, let alone a $20 break in some kind of football spot, okay? This deviates just a little bit because by all accounts, Andrew Chapin of Drew Cards was a nice guy, quote, nice guy, good guy. But unfortunately, he was convicted last month of wire fraud, among other things. Really fake it till you make it out here in San Francisco. So he came out here to San Francisco, started an advertising business, faked financial documents, faked revenue reports, and got investors to invest in him. Very common scheme out here in San Francisco, but they're very heavy-handed on that because it is the investor economy is very much big out here in San Francisco. And so he got sentenced to 3 years in prison and is ordered to pay $8 million in restitution. Now, how does this relate to trading cards? Is he had Drew's Cards, otherwise known as Really Good Cards, and unfortunately he took pre-order for product. He sold product that he didn't have, which is not necessarily untypical. We'll talk about this here in a second, but he did pre-orders for products, and unfortunately now all of his bank accounts, I'm sure, have been seized. Most of his social media, his YouTube account is still up, but his social media accounts have been scrubbed, among other things, mainly due to the fact he has $8 million in restitution to pay out. And so, but what we are seeing is some anecdotal reports of people are getting their money back via chargeback. And so here's the two things you can learn from this is, number one is, first of all, have very, very clean records of anything that you pre-order. Me personally, I would not advise to pre-order anything for this reason primarily, is the fact that the guy could go poof and then all of a sudden you've pre-ordered hundreds or thousands of dollars worth of product and then all of a sudden you're not going to get it. And now you have to fight your credit card company for that back. So you want to keep clean records, receipts, and those types of things. But I would avoid pre-ordering for the most part. The other thing that we're seeing is product continues to get pushed back week after week, month after month. So you're actually tying up your money for a longer period of time than I think you really need to. Now, if you break Heritage every year and you want to, secure yourself a case of that, or you break Series 1 that's coming out here pretty soon, and you want to secure yourself a box or two or a case of that, I don't have a problem with that, but I would go with the big three. I think you've got Blowout, you got DA, and I think you've got... I'm showing my age here, but I think they were called Pittsburgh Sports Wholesale. I think they go by a different name. I'll put their logo up here. Those are the three I would trust, honestly, and not that any of those three are perfect. I got plenty of stories about Blowout, plenty of stories about DA Card World that would make me a little concerned about ordering from them, but at least they've been around long enough and they've shown a level of consistency to where if I was pre-ordering something, I would more or less trust it with them. But the last cautionary tale is, look, just because, the backyard break guys look like crap and look like scum, well, Andrew Chapin did not look like that. He was your normal dude, seemed like a nice dude. But you always have recourse. And here's a little sneaky tip to you guys out there. People are wondering, hey, how the backyard breaks guys, how are they going to keep breaking? Well, what's going to happen to them is going to happen to every single breaker that I know, from the Mojo Breaks to the Leighton Sports Cards to the Cards Infinity. What has happened to those guys? They've got rolled by chargebacks. What do I mean? People buy into breaks, they get their cards, they call Chase, they call Capital One, and they charge it back, okay? Because really, group breaking is quasi-legal, and in the eyes of a credit card company can easily be a transaction that is reversed, even if you get your cards, even if that breaker has a clean record of what you purchased and what they shipped to you, okay? And so that's what's going to happen to the backyard break guys, okay? People will buy into those breaks, they'll get the cards, they'll charge it back, they'll stiff those guys with a pretty large bill that they have to pay their merchant processor back with. What goes around will come around. I'm not encouraging anybody to do this. I'm just saying this is very well known in this industry. Talk to any group breaker of any size. This has happened to a lot of them, and it's put a lot of them out of business, and it's put a lot of them on the sidelines. And I won't maybe divulge some of them, but I know some really, quote, big breakers that have been put on the sidelines for a couple months while they had to pay back their merchant processor after somebody came through and bought a crap ton of brakes from them, got the cards, got everything that they delivered, and then they charged it back. So make sure if you make any purchases out there, do it on a credit card. If you get scammed, if there's a problem, you usually can charge it back and you can get your money back. In this case, the fact that the guy has $8 million in restitution, a little more tricky, but hopefully that will keep you guys safe out there. So the next thing that we'll talk about is something that I'm asked about all the time is, are we going to see trading cards go back up? And it's kind of a three-pronged question. First of all, you have modern cards, the modern NBA cards, the cards that have come out within the last 5 to 6 years, certainly overproduced to a certain degree and certainly overhyped. A lot of these athletes have been tremendously overhyped based on what they've actually accomplished in their career, both statistically and from performance, maybe wins wise. So you have a little bit of that. Then you have a lot of people argue, well, vintage cards haven't gone down. You probably are bitter that you didn't have vintage cards. No, vintage cards was all I was buying there for a while. But I'll put up some graphs here. Vintage cards have not been immune to going down as well. And look, you finally have, PSA graded cards, and PSA is working through their backlog as well. Last check that I looked on PSA's website, they're still like a year behind getting out kind of that middle to lower tier graded card. So, people are calling it the junk slab era. I don't think that's peaked yet because PSA is still grinding through that. They just introduced another $50 service level the other day, which will certainly encourage more of these kind of middle class or middle tier cards being sent in. So we should see that will likely put a cap on how much those cards can go up. The other thing that we have to think about with card values is a lot of people are underwater on their Lukas. They're way underwater on their Zions. They're way underwater on basically anything modern that they've bought in the last 4 or 5 years. You can even look at Jordan cards. You can look at Kobe cards. You can look at pretty much any card out there. The volume, look, some people will argue these cards are still up from 2 or 3 or 4 years ago. Nobody was buying them 2 or 3, 4 years ago. Most of the new money came in when the stimulus money came in, when the PPP loans came in. All that money came in, and that is where you see exponential volume in terms of purchases on this card. So a lot of people are underwater on these cards. So if we do start to see prices start to stabilize and then maybe go back up, well, guess what? You've got a lot of people, I think, that are going to be on the sidelines wanting to sell these cards. I think it's going to be a while. I think we've got at least until the summertime of this year. So you still got 4 or 5 months for this supply over at PSA to kind of start to work it through. You've also got just a lot of people that are struggling financially, that are getting out of the hobby, that are getting out of the cards that they didn't buy right. And so I still think we've got a ways to go, but you'll see evidence of them in the prices. Okay, first thing we need to see is these cards to start to flatline. And I would say for at least a couple of months, these cards need to trade hands at the same price. Maybe a little bump here, little downward bump here and there. But as long as you start to see a stabilization of the price, that could be a sign that things are starting to turn the corner. That being said, I'm not necessarily predicting, and I'm absolutely not predicting a spike back upwards, okay? For months here on YouTube, you had a lot of influencers say, oh, they're going to bounce back. They're going to come back in the playoffs. They're going to come back when this happens and the national happens and the national gets over with and this, that, and the other. None of that has any impact on these cards. Okay, the biggest impact on trading card values over the last year or so were the PPP loans, were the unemployment assistance, was all the free money that was getting thrown about, in people's pockets. And guess what? They went out and spent it. Okay, and many people went out and spent it on trading cards. So absent of another stimulus check, which it doesn't look like that is going to happen, I think what we're looking for, we need to see these values start to flatline. Now, the descent on some of these cards that I'm looking at, it's starting to get a little less steep. So that gives me some sign of hope that potentially by the summertime, we start to see these things flatline. You start seeing them flatline, that could be a good sign, but I would also keep an eye on PSA's backlog process and also just the general interest in trading cards and see how that progresses throughout the years. But I would not, absolutely would not expect these cards to go back up anytime soon. There's too much supply sitting on the sideline in the hands of people that are underwater these cards. Any upward trajectory in these prices will trigger those people to sell, therefore keeping prices down.